for 515 Fantasy Football.
I know football.
Are you ready for some football?
Domination on Sundays begins with listening to these guys on Thursdays.
You ready for this?
Nearly 40 years of fantasy football experience between them.
Yeah!
One is a proud veteran of the United States Marine Corps, husband and father, entering his 17th year of fantasy competition. Brian Eikenberry. The other, also a proud husband and father, is one of the winningest fantasy minds in the state. Celebrating 23 years of excellence, Andy Hall.
Let's get the game on!
It's showtime. The 515 Fantasy Football Podcast with your hosts, Brian Eikenberry and Andy Hall.
Winning in fantasy football is more than just luck. It's the ability to see what others may not. Discern between a trend and a mirage, and giving yourself a leg up on your opponent week to week. Welcome, friends. This is the 515 Fantasy Football Show. We are the competitive advantage. Nobody breaks it down like we do, and nobody gives you a better opportunity to win than we do. I'm Andy Hall, joined as always by Brian Eikenberry. Brian, week 4 has arrived, nearly a third of the way into your fantasy regular season.
That's what's really scary about this. You're nearly 30%, 33% completed. If you're looking at your standings, you're 1-2, 0-3. You need to start kicking it in gear. And the only way you're going to do that is making the trades and playing the waiver wire. So, for our week 3 grading system, we're plus 39 as a group.
Wow.
So, if you need help, if you need it, grab your notebook, grab your pen, and start taking notes. Pay attention to the grades. We'll help you get there.
That might be the best grade I've ever gotten, and that includes kindergarten, Brian. We have a lot to get through over the course of the next hour, including all the matchups and fantasy-relevant players, the pop quiz, the bargain bin, and much more. But we begin, Brian, with headlines, the most important stories out of Week 3 and into Week 4. We begin with a significant injury in Pittsburgh where Ben Roethlisberger expected to miss at least 4 to 6 weeks with a sprained MCL and a bone bruise. What I find most interesting about this, Brian, isn't so much the MCL, it's the fact that they're making so much of this bone bruise. Doesn't sound like a very serious injury on the surface, but that might be the reason that he misses closer to the 6 weeks, maybe even more than that, than the 4.
Yeah, this is something we need to really put in numbers. It's week 4 now. He's going to miss 4 to 6 weeks. That's put you at week 10. That's after the majority of the bye weeks are through. You need to plan ahead. You need to plan for the worst case scenario. Hopefully, he makes it back in time for the end of the season for you to clean up your division and get yourself in the playoffs. But you also need to look at the rest of your fantasy roster. You're not going to bench Antonio Brown, but you also can't expect 100 yards, 150 yards, and a touchdown he's been getting through this point. So you need to prepare, you need to watch your waiver, and make those gains somewhere else.
Some other headlines of note, Marshawn Lynch, a 50-50 shot at playing Monday night. If he can't go, it could be the Thomas Rawls show once again, with Fred Jackson mixed in. DeMarco Murray was limited in practice Wednesday with an injured hammy. Not sure it'll make much difference, as both Ryan Matthews and particularly Darren Sproles looked really good in relief of Murray as they beat the Jets last weekend. Chris Ivory, speaking of the Jets, has a quad injury that's keeping him from the practice field. He's no sure bet for this week. Eric Decker still out with his injured knee, not looking good thus far for week 4. Victor Cruz suffered a setback in practice on Wednesday with his injured calf. For those of you that drafted him hoping he'd be back in the lineup as early as this week, it looks like your wishes will unfortunately not come true this week. He could be out longer. Crockett Gilmore, tight end for the Baltimore Ravens, ruled out of Thursday Night Football, taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers, so it's rookie Max Williams who will get the majority of those snaps. Alshon Jeffrey is back at practice and should play Sunday. Likely see the return of Jay Cutler under center week 5. He was a limited participant in practice this week, but they don't expect him to play in week 4. Tevin Coleman still nursing sore ribs. Devontae Freeman will once again get his shot in Week 4 after impressing against Dallas last week. Deshaun Jackson still being held out of practice for Washington. LaShawn McCoy's chances, quote, not looking good for Week 4. That's directly from Coach Rex Ryan. Also regarding the Bills, Sammy Watkins appears to be doubtful for Sunday's game as well. We're getting closer to Arian Foster's return, Brian. He has not been ruled out of Week 4 yet. There's been some word that, or some speculation, I should say, that he'll be back Week 5 or at worst Week 6. But it appears as though there's at least a chance Arian Foster gets back in that Houston lineup this week, which should be very interesting.
Yeah, that's something I know you have just been waiting and begging for, and a lot of owners have, and I would sure like it, so I have to keep picking Houston running backs for the bargain bin.
Oh, will you please stop with that? Although, had you picked Alfred Blue last week, Brian, that was the week to pick him, apparently.
Terrible. He just blows the doors off the place like he is Arian Foster. Now watch, he'll get 13 yards again, don't worry.
You're right, there you have it. Andre Ellington should return in Week 4. The majority of the carries, according to Coach Get Off My Lawn Arians, will go to Chris Johnson, but they should be excited to have Andre Ellington back, especially considering how well both Johnsons have performed in his absence. The Texans cut kicker Randy Bullock, signed Nick Novak, who was, of course, a longtime San Diego Charger. Kind of a surprising move here, but Randy Bullock is, he's on the beach. And finally, Drew Brees said he took most of the first-team reps at Saints practice Wednesday and feels, quote, really good about his chances of playing Week 4 against Dallas. And I think he's probably going to have to play regardless. The Saints are 0-3, can't really afford to go 0-4, or they could be the Chicago Bears and start having their fire sale sooner than later. Let's jump right into the matchups, Brian. We begin with Thursday Night Football, which, of course, is Baltimore at Pittsburgh. I'll start on the Ravens side of the ball with Joe Flacco. Give him a B+. He threw for 303 yards and a couple of touchdowns in the team's matchup in Pittsburgh last year. That's a reasonable expectation for this game as well, considering the Steelers have been the NFL's stingiest run defense through 3 weeks, and I think Flacco will be airing it out quite a bit against a pass defense that is near the bottom of the league. As far as Justin Forsett in the running game goes, I give him a C. He did most of his damage to Pittsburgh via the passing game in 2014. Would expect much of the same in this Thursday night matchup since his 3.2 yards per carry aren't scaring anybody, certainly not the Steelers. Lorenzo Taliaferro is back in the lineup and got himself a touchdown last week. He gets a C-. You're banking on another touchdown here from him. He won't have much luck creating room to run when given the opportunity. As far as the receivers go, the only one of note for the Ravens, as far as wide receivers go, Steve Smith, who had a huge week last week at Cincy. He gets a B+ here. Flacco's go-to, clearly. Smith showed up big last week. That Cincy defense, very similar to what he'll see in terms of coverage against Pittsburgh. So he has every bit of a chance to perform as well as he did. Tight end Max Williams, I mentioned a bit ago, is a D start, so I'd leave him on the bench. With Gilmore ruled out of this one, the rookie from Minnesota gets the start. I don't trust rookie tight ends, Brian. History has taught us time and time again, no matter how great the opportunity, rookie tight ends do not exceed expectations. On to the Pittsburgh side of the ball, and Michael Vick, who is your starting quarterback. I give him a B-. I wouldn't expect him to come anywhere near Big Ben's 6 TD passes versus the Ravens in last year's home tilt, but Vic does have some good weapons to work with and an offensive line that does a pretty good job of protecting its QB. The real value in Vic, of course, is his ability to run the ball, but the Ravens have done a very good job of maintaining their assignments thus far. As far as the running game goes, it's all Le'Veon Bell. He gets a B in this matchup. The Ravens are also a tough run D. They're giving up only an average of about 12 standard scoring points per game to opposing running backs so far. Bell will also contribute some receiving yards, but it's a good idea to temper your expectations against a formidable front seven. Receivers, Antonio Brown is an obvious A start. Doesn't matter who's slinging the rock, you're starting him. Marcus Wheaton gets a C+ from me. Both Wheaton and his still suspended counterpart, Martavis Bryant, Both had big days against these Ravens in Week 9 of 2014. There should be enough targets to go around, but the big question is whether or not Wheaton will reach the end zone, which has been his Achilles heel so far in 2015. Darius Hayward-Bay also gets a C+. He seems to be targeted more in the red zone. If the Steelers have any trouble running the ball, Hayward-Bay could very well be Vic's first look when Pitt is down deep. Tight end Heath Miller, I'll wrap up with him. He gets a B-, mainly used as a blocker. Miller could also be a nice safety valve option for Vic, who likes to move around the pocket when necessary and find a tight end like Miller in open windows created by Pitt's wideouts. That's your Thursday night matchup.
You're going to need to get a drink of water after that. That's pretty crazy. Loaded up there with points. The first London game kicks off Week 4 here, so if you're in the Central Time Zone, that's 8:30 a.m. start time, so it's always fun to wake up and click on the TV and watch some football. Unless you have a 3-year-old, then you only have to wait about 3 hours for football to come on. So, Miami, quite the team in disarray right now. Rumors of coaching staff on the hot seat already. Play calling just absolutely terrible. You're probably only going to start 2, maybe 3 here. Tannehill, he's getting a B-, as the play calling really needs to change for him to really start getting himself in that B+ A territory. You got to see a lot more pushing the ball down the field. It's just not one of the not a big point guy right now. One of the worst starts out there in the league for running back is Lamar Miller. He's only averaging 35 yards a game right now. Again, play calling Dolphins. He's getting a C at best, and sorry for everybody who drafted him early. Your 2 best chances at decent points, Rashard Matthews getting a B. He's on the lower end of the target percentage, but he's actually on the high end of the yards per catch. Out of the Dolphins, he's averaging 16.4 yards per catch and also has 3 touchdowns. So if he's out there, throw him into your slot. Landry's going to get a B. He probably should have been a B-, but, those punts help. He's probably going to sneak 1 or 2 more out this year, so it's always a nice extra 6 points on there. Tight end Jordan Cameron, check down favorite. He can also run down the field. He's got 3 catches for over 20 yards, so a B- for him. Jets, is the Fitzpatrick done? Probably not. He showed a sloppy game last week, but the Dolphins' D is obviously in trouble as they're just one of the worst defenses that you could have picked up. It's a great time for Fitz to get back on track. Look for him to keep slinging it. B+ start here. Brandon Marshall, big fan of the fish and chips, I hear. That's a total lie. I have no idea if that's true or not. He's going to get an A start. He's proven time and time again why he warrants 28.4% of the targets, 270 yards, 3 touchdowns out of him already. Let's forgive him for that stupid fumble last week. Move on to Decker. Hopefully he's back. He's ready to go. That PCL. A little bit of tenderness there, but he may not yet be 100% confident to make those big turn burns. But having Marshall and Decker on the field at the same time makes for huge numbers for Fitz. So everybody's kind of getting it here. You got to look at Ivory as well. Hopefully he's back. He's back into 100%. Watch for Ivory, B+ out of him, just in case he gets another bruise. If you look, here's the fun thing about the Jets. If one of these 4 people are out, their points drop drastically. But if Fitz is in, Marshall's in, Decker's in, Ivory's in, their points go up like 10 points per position. It's absolutely crazy. They are all connected. They've got the feng shui going on in the field. And so if everybody's out there, look for the Jets to do some damage to fantasy football lineups.
Wow. I guess I'm crossing my fingers for Decker this week. I think Marshall should be just fine. Don't worry about the fumble thing. He's had some monster games. He's one of the most underrated guys out there right now. And as far as Ivory goes, another guy I'm crossing my fingers for, as I mentioned in headlines. My next matchup is Jacksonville at Indianapolis. We'll begin with the Jags' Blake Bortles, who gets a B in this matchup. Indy is a very mediocre pass defense. Bortles will need to throw early and often in a game that will likely get out of hand before halftime. If he can avoid multiple turnovers, I expect Bortles to put up a solid stat line on Sunday. His running back is TJ Yeldon. He gets a C-. His Sunday could be very similar to Week 3 against the Patriots, in which the game got away from the Jags early. The run game was completely abandoned, and Yeldon never really even even got a chance to get warm. Unfortunate, Indy's D is 25th against opposing running backs, but I don't see Yeldon breaking out because of game flow. Receivers, I like Allen Robinson this week. He gets an A-. Likely he'll draw coverage from the banged-up Vontae Davis. Should see the majority of Jags' targets and receptions as they play from behind. Allen Hurns gets a B. Always a threat to score from anywhere on the field. He won't blow you away with much else he has to offer, but I like him this week because of the potential for game flow to benefit his skill set. That's it for the Jags. As far as the Colts go, Andrew Luck is an A start. Despite being limited in practice this week, he's got a sore shoulder. I expect Luck to play. He'll explode all over this Jags defense in what amounts to a must-win for head coach Chuck Pagano, who's on the hot seat. As far as the running back goes, I think Frank Gore's the only one of note here. A- is what he gets from me. He'll continue to bounce back from a terrible start to the 2015 season. High volume, especially once Indy gets up by a couple scores, and a potential of a score or two for Gore. As far as the receivers, T.Y. Hilton is an A. Should have very little issue carving up the Jags' 27th ranked pass defense. Dante Moncrief will also get a grade from me, a B+. I also like his chances of producing in this matchup. And because it appears as though Dwayne Allen is going to miss some time at tight end, Kobe Fleener gets a C+. Have yet to see much from him in 2015. He scored in one of these teams' two matchups last season. He benefits from Allen's absence. There is some upside here. I'm not sure how much, but he will be on the field.
Giants at the Bills. So there's never really a bad time to be an Odell Beckham owner, but this is probably one where he's not going to have some crazy points. The Bills' D is killing it. They're putting a lot of pressure on the quarterbacks, which is not going to give your quarterback a lot of time to really launch it downfield. So ODB, your favorite acronym, is going to get a B here. It's going to be tough for him to get those big yards, but I'm expecting a little bit of garbage time. He might be held out of the end zone, but he's still going to get his yards. It's just kind of a bad matchup with going against Buffalo's defense. Victor Cruz, he re-injured himself a little bit. He tweaked it again. You shouldn't even be having him in there, but I feel the need to mention it just in case you're hoping he comes back or you're hoping off of name recognition here. Eli, it's going to be a risky one here. I think you're going to see the pouty Eli. I think you're going to see him throw some really nasty picks from being under pressure. So Eli's going to get a B- out of me. Rashard Jennings, unfortunately, is in a three-way battle here. I personally was hoping Rashad Jennings could really make a statement this year, really get himself together, and kind of be that back, but he's not. It's only used in emergency. He's going to get a C- from a value perspective, even though last week he had some crazy points on a block punt and a safety with that game last week, but don't expect that kind of magic. So if you're looking at point totals from last week, you might as well factor out 4 or 5, however your league scores. So do not start any of the Giants running backs, only in case of emergencies. Moving on to Buffalo, Tyrod Taylor is blowing up the fantasy charts last week. He's been pretty consistent at doing it. Expect the same thing from him again here in week 4. B+ against the Giants secondary. LaShawn McCoy, as you heard, he's nursing that hammy. So get ready for Carlos Williams' show. He's going to make his debut as the just really solidifying himself on fantasy football rosters. If you were smart enough to pick him up last week and kind of stash him away, been looking at some of the ownership categories. He's owned in 75%. So if you missed the boat on him, sorry about your bad luck. So Carlos Williams is going to get a B+. Sammy Watkins, again, it just re-aggravating of that injury, so you can't count him out. But all of those things help out Percy Harvin. Percy has a chance to save the day here. B+ out of Percy. That Giants defense has given up 345 passing yards per game. So look for Percy to catch a lot of those balls. Also, Charles Clay. He's going to be involved as a regular. And as a tight end with 22% of the targets, it's a sweet treat. Give an A for Charles Clay. Also, be on the lookout for wide receiver Robert Woods to get in some good actions with Sammy Watkins off the radar. He's averaging 13.9 yards per catch, and his role is obviously going to increase this week.
Carolina at Tampa Bay. We'll begin with Cam Newton on the Panthers side of the ball. He gets a B+. Tough to expect more than maybe one touchdown pass from him in a matchup like this. Newton is in your lineup because of his rushing stats. If Carolina gets inside the 5-yard line, it's almost a guarantee Newton will take at least one crack at carrying into the end zone. Jameis Winston. Sorry, I'll move on to the running game before I move on to the next team there, Brian. Jonathan Stewart gets a B. He should have a little luck against the Bucs' 26th ranked rush defense. He needs to get into the end zone, though, before I consider him anything more than a B-grade start, even in a great matchup. Mike Tolbert, worth mentioning. He gets a C-. Decent amount of snaps. Tolbert, another reason why Stewart isn't graded higher in weeks like this. The receivers, Ted Ginn Jr. gets a B. I can't even remember the last time I had a grade on Ted Ginn Jr., but I like him better than any of the other wide receiver options Newton's got. Speedy, good hands, runs a nice route, should be owned if he's not already in your league. And Greg Olsen is an obvious A great start no matter the matchup. I'll add this on top of that. The Panthers' defense and special teams gets a B+ from me this week. Tampa has a penchant for turning the ball over. They also haven't been scoring that much. Jameis Winston, back to Jameis. He gets a C-. Carolina has been very good against opposing quarterbacks thus far, giving up an average of only about 14 points per game to the position through 3 weeks. Winston also has that penchant for turnovers I mentioned. The running game. Charles Sims gets a B-. Carolina is a below-average rush defense, and from what I can tell, Sims is giving the Bucs a spark out of the backfield that Doug Martin thus far has not. Decent flex option, particularly in PPR leagues. That's where Sims tends to shine. Doug Martin gets a C, should continue to carry the majority of the load, but for how much longer is the question. Averaging only 3.8 yards per carry, has yet to reach the end zone by ground or by air. As far as the receivers go, Mike Evans is a B here. Carolina has been very good against the pass this season, but I have this feeling that this is the week Evans will score his first touchdown. Typically, the Panthers give up about one per game. I don't know if you noticed this, Brian. This stat jumped off the page at me. 17 targets to Mike Evans in week 3. They're obviously trying to feed him. Eventually, he'll grab one. Vincent Jackson is your other receiver of note. He gets a C+. Nothing more than a desperation flex play this week. VJax will see a fair share of targets, but I think this will be another big Evans week, and that'll do it for that matchup.
Philly's going to look to keep the momentum going that they rallied up from the Jets against the Redskins here, but I don't think you should be doing quite backflips if you're just looking at the scoreboard saying, oh, wow, look, Philly's back. A lot of that was on the defense, and a lot of that was just the Jets playing very, very poorly. With that said, looking at the running back situation, who are you going to start? What are you going to do? If Murray's out, you've got Matthews and Sproles. If I had to choose, I'm a betting man. I'm going with Sproles. Reason? He is catching those passes, and like a lot of them. So Sproles is going to get a B- out of me. He's catching so many passes that Sproles is a running back who is statistically the number 2 wide receivers on the Eagles roster with 17% of your targets, 118 yards, second only to Jordan Matthews. Sproles is going to catch a lot more passes against the Redskins here. Give Matthews a C+. We don't quite know how that's going to shake out with him and Sproles kind of going back and forth. If Murray truly is out, if Murray's back in, then you just don't know what's going on. And I don't think you can miss starting Matthews or Sproles. Just keep an eye on Murray there because he's the wild card and really kind of throws everything off skew there. Jordan Matthews, he's going to get a B. Sam Bradford's getting a C+ here. As he still isn't a starter they claimed him to be, making all those trades in the offseason, really ramping him up. All of his decisions are better. He's looking. He's got great vision, anticipation. None of that is true. It was all a lie. Chip Kelly, I have no idea what you're doing. Most of his stats to Jordan Matthews come from garbage time, which in fantasy world, we don't care. You just can't always count on those garbage time points to help you out. In the words of the wise from the show, yuck. Tight end Zach Ertz, always good for a few catches, but Sproles is really starting to take those dump-offs and those checkdowns away. C-start for Ertz. Nelson Aguilar and Riley Cooper, don't even think about them yet, like ever. It's just not working out with those guys. However, Nelson Aguilar did get some dap from Darrelle Revis and said, you will be good someday. So some of you might wonder why all those average grades against. Well, number 2 defense is in Washington. Likely a skewed statistic. It's typically done off of yardage. And if your QB turns over the ball a lot in your own territory, your opponents only really have to go 20 yards for that touchdown. So enter Kirk Cousins. D-start, don't unless you absolutely have to. And even if you do, stay tuned for the bargain bin. 4 interceptions and 3 touchdowns for him. No soup for him. Sorry for the Alfred Morris disaster. Jay Gruden has stated that Alfred Morris is still the starter. However, carries paint a different picture. It is a 50-50 split out of those two. Full-blown committee. Both get C minuses here because of that committee and also Philly's strong run D. 8th in the league, and that's a real stat, not a skewed one. Philly's front 7 is actually playing pretty decent. Pierre Garçon, B minus. Jordan Reed, main pass catcher here on Washington's roster, 25% of the targets, A start. It is crazy when your tight end is getting a quarter of the looks. 19 receptions, 240 yards, 41 yards for him. Deshaun Jackson still out. Hopefully we get a grade on him next week.
Brian, I have the highest graded tight end of all time in this next matchup. It is Oakland at Chicago, which might not break any records in terms of the TV ratings, but there are some players of fantasy note here, including a bunch of Raiders. Derek Carr gets a B+. He's been on a roll. He should have no trouble continuing that trend this week against one of the league's worst pass defenses. Even on their home field, I feel good about Carr this week. The running game, Latavius Murray, a B+. Facing a Bears defense that has allowed just over 18 fantasy points per game to the running back position through 3 games and is already selling key pieces from their pass rush. It's a fire sale in Chicago. Actually, I should probably watch that because they've had some pretty notable fires throughout the course of history. As far as the receivers go, a couple from the Raiders, including Amari Cooper, gets a B+, turning into a fantasy stud right before our eyes. Very strong wide receiver 2. Ceiling is low-end wide receiver 1 numbers in a matchup like this one. Michael Crabtree gets a B, benefits from Cooper's emergence by drawing the opponent's second-best coverage guy week to week. He's dangerous enough to warrant fantasy consideration in most matchups. That'll really do it for the Raiders, aside from perhaps giving their defense and special teams a shot this week. I give them a B+ against a terrible Chicago Bears offense, led by Jimmy Clausen, who I don't even know why I'm wasting my breath right now. Let's move on to the running back position, and Matt Forte. He gets a B. He'll see a lot of action regardless of whether or not game flow dictates more throwing from Chicago. They're going to get from him what they can before they eventually sell him too. And there's been talk that there have been some trade rumors with Matt Forte. Alshon Jeffrey is the only receiver of note, wide receiver at least. He gets a C. Limited in practice after missing weeks 2 and 3, but all reports are he should play this Sunday against a better-than-advertised Raiders pass defense. As far as the tight end position, Brian, the highest grade I have ever given out is an A+. Very rarely does this grade get given out. But this week, Martellus Bennett is the proud recipient of an A+ grade. Best start of the week, maybe for any position, facing an Oakland defense that has given up over 20 fantasy points per game to the tight end position in the first few weeks of this season. New Orleans, to give you an idea, second worst at just under 15 points per game to the tight ends. Over 20
Huge
points per
difference.
game have been given up by the Oakland Raiders. So Martellus Bennett should be a no-brainer this week. I do believe we have one more matchup before the pop quiz, Brian.
Well, apparently mark that grade on the calendar, so everybody be watching for that one. Houston's going to look to ramp up their passing game this week against Atlanta's 23rd ranked pass defense. And last week's bargain bin, Ryan Mallett, he's going to be connecting with DeAndre Hopkins and Nate Washington. B- for Ryan Mallett, as I expect him to get some momentum, but they're probably going to be playing from behind a lot, which also means he's going to be throwing a lot. Probably going to throw a pick or two, but be careful. He's going to be chucking it. DeAndre Hopkins is going to get an A, 27% of all the targets in the air with 3 touchdowns to prove it. Expect another week just like his last. Nate Washington, he's going to get a B start only because the TDs are actually going to Hopkins, not Nate Washington. He's not really that big red zone threat, but hey, he could probably sneak one in here. Alfred Blue, we talked about him many, many times before. Back in my discussion again, but he's only performed 1 week. He's not Meatloaf. 1 out of 3 is bad. So unless it's a fantasy football roster, sorry, Blue, C plus for now. Hopefully Mallet opens it up for him again. Watch for Arian Foster. He's really close. Bill O'Brien listed as real close. So time to start picking who you're going to drop so you can move him back into your roster and get on with it. Bye weeks are coming up. Atlanta, quite the big surprise here. I have been stunned by what the Falcons are doing. Matt Ryan is impressive A-start here. Big numbers coming his way again. He's very smart with his passes. His accuracy is looking a lot better, especially downfield. Julio Jones getting these huge, huge numbers last week. Julio's going to get an A here. He's not probably going to have the week he did last, but still going to have a great stat line. Falcons rank number 2 in the passing offense. Roddy White, C-. He is proving that age is a factor to all wide receivers not named Steve Smith Sr. The Falcons have all but given Leonard Hankerson the number 2 designation. He's going to get a B here. Running backs, I think it's pretty clear. Devonta Freeman is showing that he can do this all by himself, regardless of Tevin Coleman's injury or anything like that. He can do it. Freeman's a go for me, B+. He showed what he can do. He likely blew up your bench. I've seen a lot of rosters that had him right in the pine, and those people were extremely, extremely upset. Jacob Tam hasn't done much. He's out with his concussion. His replacement is Levine Tolililo, something to that effect. No start, doesn't matter.
You're talking about guys that you're looking to maybe drop and make some room. Roddy White could be one of those guys.
Bye-bye.
Brian, he hasn't even been targeted when he's on the field.
It's insane. I think it's almost just disrespectful to see him being just looked off so quickly. And that's what kind of stinks is the NFL is reality. Regardless of how long you've been here and what you've done and mentoring Julio Jones and all of that, you are nothing now. And I think it's borderline disrespectful to me, to just the way he's been just forgotten about.
Roddy, you can set him right next to Andre Johnson on that same bench.
Yes, you can.
This is the 515 Fantasy Football Show. I'm Andy Hall. That's Brian Eikenberry. We are on Facebook, 515 Fantasy. We are also at 515 Fantasy on Twitter. We also are on 1350 ESPN Radio in Des Moines, all but this week. We happen to be preempted by the Chicago Cubs, which is all right. That's bound to happen. But baseball season is wrapping up, so you'll hear us more often than not Thursdays at noon on the all-new 1350 ESPN Radio. Still to come, along with the rest of your Week 4 matchups, the bargain bin, and a few players you might want to consider if you're in a tough spot, many of which are available on your waiver wire. That's what the bargain bin's all about. It is time for everyone's favorite segment, well, except maybe Brian's.
Except mine.
The pop quiz. 3 questions that may result in Brian's own reenactment of the movie Scanners. I ask the questions, Brian responds as best he can, and then I unveil the correct answer, and that's how this works.
It's always a sham.
You say that. I should just rename it I Win.
Pretty
All right.
much.
Question 1. Regarding the Patriots' backfield, and specifically Dion Lewis, are you holding or selling based on what he's capable of the rest of the season?
I am holding here because Belichick plays to the team. If he feels that the LeGarrette Blount just run him up and smash him over style is what the opponents are weak against, then that's who's getting the start. If it's more in favor of Dion Lewis, a little bit of spice in your running back situation, then that's what it's going to call for. That's why Belichick is so smart and good, is because he knows what his strengths are and he plays to his players' strengths. He puts the right people in the right positions to get the job done.
The answer is holding. Even with LeGarrette Blount and James White getting significant snaps in certain situations, like we saw last week, Lewis is the player New England wanted Shane Vereen to be the past few years, never quite panned out. He's averaging nearly 5 yards per carry. He's a significant contributor in the passing game. I agree with you that Belichick is a guy that looks at a matchup before he looks at a player and plugs in the right guy for that matchup. For that reason, LeGarrette Blount will be that guy some weeks. I still think Lewis is going to be a big contributor. You know what the key was for me in this, Brian, was Dion Lewis losing a fumble, and Belichick did not bench him.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty big vote of confidence there. Usually you fumble, Belichick angry, he make you sit out of practice and all sorts of bad stuff, even if you're a couple minutes late. He's a pretty big stickler on stuff like that, but maybe the old man's starting to soften up a little bit.
Question 2, of these 3 preseason consensus top 10 running backs, who shakes their funk and ends the season top 10? Will it be Jeremy Hill, Justin Forsett, or C.J. Anderson?
All right, so I'm going to pick Forsett here for a couple of reasons. One, he has no reasonable backup. Hill's got Geo, C.J. Anderson has Hillman, and we knew that was going down. So they have steady competition nipping at their heels. Forsett is still going to get the carries. He's still going to do it. Here's the problem. Kubiak left. They didn't know how to keep going with this. I've been reading really in depth on Forsett here and what's going on as a Forsett owner. And the problem is that the offensive line is just not playing what they were supposed to do. Part of Forsett coming back to the Ravens is because everybody on that offensive line was coming back again. That's what the big part of the success was. I don't think it's so much Kubiak, it's just that the offensive line is playing bad. They're going to get it figured out. They're going to be there. They're the same exact people they were last year. They're going to get it figured out. Forsett's going to be back to business. Just hold out with me because he's in my roster still. I can't pull the plug because as soon as I do, he's off to the races.
The correct answer is Jeremy Hill.
Boo.
Great O-line. Dalton and his passing game performing above expectations. Bengals generally playing out in front of competition week to week. Even with Bernard getting his share of touches, Hill the most likely of the 3 to get his mojo back. Forsett, I don't like the fact that he's consistently losing goal line touches to Taliaferro. Obviously, you mentioned Gary Kubiak. He misses that scheme quite a bit. I won't even mention C.J. Anderson and the mess that's going on in Denver right now. So that wasn't even an option. I made this sort of a 50-50 shot for you. Unfortunately, Mr. Bryan, you chose wrong. But
if any of you listeners out there agree with me, make sure you send us a message. Show your support for me, please. Suffer with me.
We would put you on a cereal box or something. That's what I think. Question 3. Many seem to believe Arian Foster will return in Week 5 against Indianapolis. If indeed that is the case, let's assume that is the case, at what position does he finish the season amongst all NFL running backs in standard scoring, non-PPR leagues?
He's going to get eased back in. He's not going to take a full workload.
Disagree completely.
No. Well, that's good. I think he's going to get eased back in. If he comes back next week, that's awfully brave. Probably should test him for some PEDs. Make sure he gets that cup to go in. I'm thinking he's going to finish in the top 10 because outside of the top 6, 7, it's really an open race. It's not going to take that much to catch up to a lot of running backs. Look around, C.J. Anderson. Just look at the teams: Ravens, Lions, Broncos, Bengals. They're splitting time. I mean, there's lots of stuff happening. He could easily get in the top 10, between 7 and 10.
Why don't you give me a number, Brian?
I'll go with 9.
The correct answer is 7. He finished 5th in 2014, having missed 3 games total. His average game, he scored nearly 15 fantasy points per game in standard scoring leagues. Take 15 points from his 235 that he scored as the 5th scoring running back last season. That's 220. Last year's running back 6 was Eddie Lacy at 229. Running back 7, Jamal Charles at 208. That puts Mr. Arian Foster at number 7. Now, this disagreement of you and I. Here's my thinking on this Arian Foster situation as a whole. He's not going to hit the field until he's 100%. That's it. It might not be week 5. I use that as an example for the question. But my assertion is there's no easing Arian Foster back in. He will not be back in that lineup until he is 100%, and at that point he's going to hit the ground running. That's my call.
You could almost say he's like the Derrick Rose of football. It seems like it's one injury after another with this guy. I have never been a big Arian Foster fan. When he's healthy and he's running, he is racking up those points. But you have to invest something in him. And I think if he comes back in 25 touches a game, he's getting hurt again, and he'll be back out in 3 weeks.
Would you like a bonus question?
What's that?
Would you like a bonus question, Brian?
Yeah. Let's play bonus because you're a trickster.
Well, this isn't my question. We got an email.
Oh, extra credit. The study hall.
Justin wrote us via email, 515fantasy@gmail.com. He needs 2 of these 3. Now, he didn't tell me what the scoring system was, and that's a pretty important piece of information, particularly PPR versus non-PPR. So I'm going to have to assume that this is standard scoring non-PPR. All right?
Yep, sounds good. That's fair. Usually if people want PPR, they say it.
That's what I thought too. Pick 2 of the 3 to start, okay? You got a pen?
Yep.
The 3 are Forsett at Pittsburgh, Hyde taking on Green Bay, Bernard taking on the Chiefs.
And Gio at the Chefs.
What do you think? 2 out of those 3. So you could just look at this as process of elimination, couldn't you? Is there one on that list that you say absolutely not to right off the bat?
I guess just from a defensive standpoint, I would eliminate Gio. Just because he's playing the Chiefs. The Chiefs' defense is better than the Steelers and the Packers. Plus, Gio, his workload depends on how bad Jeremy Hill is doing and starting off. Marvin Lewis has shown he's not afraid to bench him. So, God, with that said, because I was just going to say it's all about consistency, but then if you look at Forsett, he's averaging like 6 points a game. So
he's been terrible, Brian. I mean, that's the thing. The thing with Bernard is, Hill's going to get the start. And if Hill ain't doing the job against a tough Kansas City defense, don't you think Bernard would get more of the work?
Oh yeah, absolutely. They're not going to hesitate to flip it to the vet and let.
Well, I think for that reason, I think Bernard's got to be one of his options here. I think you got to plug Bernard in for sure. And then as far as my opinion, Hyde, that's a tough one because Hyde's going to be in a game where Green Bay is going to be way out in front. This is going to be a blowout. And how much contribution can Hyde really have in this game if they abandon the running game? And by the way, Reggie Bush likely will be back in the lineup for San Francisco this weekend.
You can run on Green Bay, and let's hope they just let him run because let's just do this. If Hyde runs for 30 yards in the first quarter, he's already got more points than Forsett does out of his whole last week's game. So if they're behind in quarters 3 and 4, this sucks. This is a bad position. I think he should hit the waiver wire and listen to the bargain bin. That's my final answer.
I haven't gone through my entire matchups yet. One of them is the Kansas City-Cincinnati game. I'll get to that in a second. And Green Bay at San Fran is another of my matchups. I will share with you my grades just to answer Justin's question. We've already heard that I'm giving Justin Forsett a C this week. I'm giving Giovanni Bernard a B this week. So Bernard's one of your starts. I'm giving Carlos Hyde a B-. So my opinion, Bernard, Hyde, leave Forsett on the bench. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I'll go with that just because I'm going to eliminate my own personal feelings with Forsett as being a Forsett owner. I'll go with that because I'm going to leave in Hyde. For me, it comes down to either Gio or Forsett because I fell back on consistency. And Gio, if we're going to look at consistency, Gio has outscored Justin Forsett in every single game so far.
You know, another thing that makes this tough, Brian, these Thursday night games tend to be very run-heavy. These teams are all operating, for the most part, on short weeks. So, I don't know. This is really tough, but I think I'm going to stick with my guns here and go Hyde, Bernard. Justin, thank you so much for writing. The Kansas City-Cincinnati matchup is next for me. Begin with Alex Smith, who gets a C-. Fairly certain we witnessed his ceiling in last week's loss at Green Bay. A lot of it in garbage time, granted, but the Bengals are more formidable against the pass than the Packers. 290 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. That's probably as good as it may get for Smith. As far as the running game goes, Jamaal Charles is an A. Must start most weeks, including this one. Jeremy Maclin gets a B-. Finally, a Chiefs wide receiver scored a touchdown in a regular season game. How about that? Maclin was the lucky recipient. He should continue to be fed the majority of the targets from Smith in the KC passing game, and they're probably going to have to do a bunch of passing in this one. Travis Kelce gets a B-. Not in love with this matchup, but Kelce is one of those guys that's capable of bucking the trends, so I am not benching him. And yes, I said bucking, B-U-C-K-I-N-G. As far as Cincinnati goes, Andy Dalton gets a B+. He's got great weapons in Green, Jones, Sanu, Eifert, and Bernard, which leads to the fast start that he's off to. The Chiefs are currently the bottom-ranked pass defense in the league. Much of that, of course, due to Aaron Rodgers in Week 3, but they're not really that great. As far as the running backs, I alluded to Giovanni Bernard a bit ago. He gets a B. The Chiefs have the 4th-ranked run defense in the NFL. You alluded to the fact they're tough. That's true. Bernard gets the nod over Hill in terms of grading because of his contributions in the passing game where he should have some more luck. Jeremy Hill gets a C in this one. Neither Eddie Lacy nor James Starks reached the end zone in Week 3, nor did any of the Broncos backs in Week 2, nor the Texans in Week 1. If you were hoping Hill would get back on track and start performing like a first-round draft pick against Kansas City, you're likely wrong and should look elsewhere. But now that makes me second-guess my pick of Giovanni Bernard for Justin. Maybe it should be Forsett and Hyde. I don't know. Damn. AJ
Justin's
Green.
Just throwing a wrench.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe he should, like you said, maybe he should tune into Bargain Bin. The receivers, AJ Green gets an A. He's the best bet of the lot of weapons the Bengals possess versus the league's worst pass defense. Marvin Jones gets a B+. You'll hear more on him in the Bargain Bin segment coming up a little bit later. Tyler Eifert, a B-. Same story as with Travis Kelce. He's been very boomer bust thus far, but because of his potential, you can't really sit him. And that does it for that matchup.
Cleveland at San Diego. Not much room on the Browns roster for your fantasy football roster, but let's not immediately pass on McCown here. He did throw it 49 times. He threw for 341 yards and 2 touchdowns with a pick. But the Chargers have the number 3 pass defense. C start only if you have to, because you had Brady or Mariota on a bye. There is locker room turmoil as players and fans want Manziel. It could fuel McCown to do better, or it could ultimately be his demise. I'm going to pick demise. The Crows should get some looks this week as he's a good matchup against the Chargers. Give him a B. He only had 10 touches last week, but it wasn't his fault. It was a game situation. Duke Johnson, not yet. Keep him stashed away. Wide receiver Travis Benjamin still gets action even with Manziel out. With the ball being tossed a ton, 1 or 2 people are going to get the catches. B- for Benjamin, and someone you talked about last week, your little sneaker here, tight end Gary Barnridge. He's somewhat under the radar, so you might want to go out and grab him right now. 3 passes for over 20 yards. He's caught 15% of the targets and a touchdown. He is McCown's little safety net, and look for him to get a lot against the Chargers' pass defense. So there's going to be plenty of checkdowns. B+ for him. Hawkins gets a D. Brian Hartline, D. No pass catchers outside of Barnridge and Benjamin should be getting a start on your fantasy football roster. Chargers need to get the win. They're going to be playing tough. The AFC West and the Chargers are looking upwards on that standing. So Rivers is going to get an A here. Browns defense terrible. Joe Hayden, he is beatable this year, so I'm not concerned. Keenan Allen, he's going to keep it rocking in the free world. He's going to get an A. 36% of the targets, probably skewed from week 1 against the Lions, but hopefully he's going to keep on rocking, get his TDs back on track. Stevie Johnson and Malcolm Floyd, B and C respectively. If you've got both of these running backs, I'm going to roll the dice and say you might want to start both running backs. Just throwing that out there. Melvin Gordon Woodhead both getting Bs here. 2 running backs on the same team getting pretty good points out of both of them. So you're going to have to watch that. Gordon's getting the yards. Woodhead's getting the touchdowns. I think they're going to mix it up a lot. I think they're going to get a lot of action, and I don't think you're going to be disappointed in starting either one of those. So both of those guys are getting Bs. Ladarius Green, he's practicing. The concussion protocol has not been completed yet. He might get the chance to play one last week before Gates comes back.
Green Bay at San Francisco is next. Aaron Rodgers, an obvious A start. I start him every week. Eddie Lacy, also an A. The Niners are ranked 29th against opposing running backs. Remember, that ranking includes their dominant performance in week 1 against Adrian Peterson and the Minnesota Vikings. That's bad. Lacy should be money this week. As far as James Starks goes, he might get some playing time here, C+. If the Pack get out to a huge early lead, Starks will mix in with Lacy and possibly get the salt carries in the second half, which could lead to some decent fantasy production. So I've got him there just as a thought, perhaps a flex, if you will. The receivers, Randall Cobb is an A, money in the bank. James Jones is a B. Established as Green Bay's second wide receiver, Jones should be valued similarly on your fantasy squad. He's a very solid wide receiver too, week in and week out. Ty Montgomery gets a C. With Devontae Adams likely out this week, look for the rookie to get increased looks. Richard Rodgers gets a C. Not seeing enough volume to be an every week starter, but in the Packers offense, anyone is a threat to score at any time. The Packers defense and special teams should be considered a B start this week. As far as the Niners go, there's not a heck of a lot to talk about. Colin Kaepernick is firmly on your bench at this point. Carlos Hyde gets that B- I mentioned a bit ago. It's a decent matchup, but game flow could spell disaster for Hyde's fantasy day, which is why I've lowered my expectations for a guy I would normally have graded higher. Anquan Bolden is a B, definitely the most consistent wide receiver of this squad. Bolden should see a ton of action as the Niners figure to be playing from behind much of this game. Torrey Smith, a C+, very boomer bust, as he was in Baltimore for much of his career as a Raven. And that is the San Francisco 49er squad.
I'm going to kick it off here again with the Rams cards. Not much work on the Rams roster worthy of fantasy football note. Gurley is only if you are desperate. He's slowly getting the workload, but he's not really going to be back into it heavy until after the bye week. He's just getting reps as a formality so he can get popped a couple times. Then he's out of there. He does have the ability to break a big one, so I'm still not starting him yet, but if you absolutely need a grade, I'm going to give him a C- just in case. No other Rams running backs or starts. The carries are split. It's all over the place. Foles is a D for disaster. Kenny Britt's getting a D for no consistency. Cook, D, same situation. These guys are just all over the place. Still curious as why Brian Quick is not playing. He was supposed to be having this injury, but he's healthy, and it's a coach's scratch, and just, I don't know, apparently he made Jeff Fisher mad. From a fantasy football standpoint, there's literally nothing you can say for the Rams at this point. You could start the Rams D if they weren't playing Carson Palmer and Fitzgerald combo. Carson Palmer, he continues to impress. 9 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and 800 yards through 3 games. That's awesome for Carson Palmer, as long as his knees are okay. He's going to get an A. Fitzgerald is on the field. He gets an A too. Together, these two are virtually unstoppable, and the proof is in the pudding. Fitz is averaging 111 yards per game, has 5 touchdowns. That's incredible. Statistic of note, he also has 8 catches for 20-plus yards, which is even more impressive. So clearly these two are on the same page. They have consistency. They have chemistry. If both of these guys are a go, they're both going to be A's no matter what. John Brown, he's showing consistency on fantasy relevancy, nearly 20% of the targets, so B for Brown. Tight end Darren Fells, he's going to get a C start. Not many passes to go around when those two guys are chewing up the majority of it. Ellington is back. Chris Johnson, he's in the mix still too. He had the hot game. He threw up a game like he was the CJ2K game of old there. 50-50 split. I foresee for these two guys. But Johnson's a hot hand, and we know how Get Off My Lawn is going to handle this. So it's a tough there. Both are going to get a B minus. It's a risk reward here thing. If you start Johnson and he's tipping his hat back to Ellington, he's under that you don't lose your starting job to injury kind of routine. It's just kind of tough there. B minus, start him. It's worth it. Give it a go. David Johnson, as much as we all here locally want him to be that guy and really break it out, he's in a bad situation now. Ellington's back. Chris Johnson's doing just fine. He's not really going to get in there. He's only got 12 rushing attempts in 3 games. If you take away that big 55-yard TD, he only has 19 yards receiving. So stash him for the future. Ellington's probably going to get injured again. Chris Johnson's probably going to be back to last year's Chris Johnson. He's probably going to sneak in there. So stash him on your roster. Don't let him go. I'm not going to bring him any more up until that situation arises.
There you have it. The Vikings are traveling to Denver for a Sunday afternoon tilt. Teddy Bridgewater gets a D here. I'm leaving him on my bench. He should probably be dropped, actually, from most fantasy rosters. I can't see many weeks, if any, that Teddy will put up more than about 250 yards and 1 or 2 touchdowns in a game. That's a pretty low ceiling in terms of fantasy. Adrian Peterson will get a B+. Denver's a very average rush defense. Peterson, now that he's Peterson again, should find some room to run again this week. As far as the receivers go, I'm leaving pretty much all the Vikings on the bench, including Mike Wallace. The wide receiver position in Minnesota just isn't conducive to fantasy success at all. Wallace probably the best of the bunch, but no big threat to score week to week, particularly in a matchup against the league's best against the pass. The only other receiver I'll mention here is Jarius Wright. Charles Johnson could miss this game. Jarius Wright is kind of a sneaky option that'll avoid Aqib Talib, who likely will match up with Mike Wallace. Chris Harris, who will probably get the new guy in the Vikings offense. So I don't like any of them, but Jarius Wright maybe is the one guy that I'll throw out there as like the desperation of desperation starts. Kyle Rudolph gets a C. He's a red zone target. He may be Teddy's only touchdown toss if he does have one in this game. As far as the Broncos go, you're starting a lot of these guys. Peyton Manning gets a B+. If his offensive line can keep Minnesota's pass rush away, Manning should have a very Peyton-like Sunday afternoon. If not, and he's back there running for his life, this could be a very long day for Manning. So a good grade, but a little bit of risk here. Minnesota's defense looking very stout. C.J. Anderson gets a C+. I'm still not buying him as a fantasy stud, mostly due to his poor offensive line, but also this eye test. You know, I've been watching him. He's failing the eye test miserably through 3 games. He looks like he's running with weights in his shoes. Ronnie Hillman gets a C+ as well. The better of the two Denver backs, at least in my opinion. Very shaky matchup here, though, against a Vikings defense that, since week 1, are allowing less than 10 fantasy points per game to the running back position. Carlos Hyde got what he got. Nobody else is feeding. As far as the receivers go, Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas will both get a B+ from me in this one. The Vikings secondary has been serviceable, but they're not great. Xavier Rhodes may play, but not at 100%. Sanders and Thomas are a duo that not many teams possess. One will likely have a bigger day than the other in this matchup, but you're likely starting both anyhow. And Owen Daniels is the tight end. He gets a C. He got into the end zone last week, if you didn't notice, but typically he'll be Peyton's third or even fourth option on most pass routes. You're praying for a touchdown if you're starting Owen Daniels this week. I believe we're on to the Sunday night matchup with you, Brian.
Cowboys Saints. Whedon's going to get the nod again. He's going to be the check down champ as predicted, like he was last week. Let's give Whedon the B- here because of the Saints' defense. Whedon showed he can do enough to not get himself into a whole lot of trouble. Expect a average or slightly below average stat line, somewhere around 200, a touchdown and a pick. Last week's bargain bin, Lance Dunbar, solid nab, and now is the time to keep him going. He's the leading receiver for the Cowboys. Think about that. If I told you 4 weeks ago that Lance stinking Dunbar is going to be the Cowboys' leading receiver entering week 4, you probably would have bet your house that I was wrong, and I would now be living in your house. Dunbar is going to get a B here because of his short pass-catching ability and making those first downs. He's moving those chains. He's getting those small chunks of yards. He's making something happen, and he's proving it. He had 10 catches for 100 yards last week. That's a sweet bargain bin action. He's going to get plenty of it, lining up as that running back and a wide receiver in the spread offense. Witten, he's always going to be there with the B-. Terrence Williams, bad news, 0 catches last week on his 2 targets. I think it's more of Whedon's inability to get it to him rather than Terrence Williams. C+ here. Things aren't going to change with Whedon until he gets that ball deep, but it's just not going to happen. It's going to open the door to errors, and I think the Cowboys are just playing safe football here. They're going to let the running backs win the game. They're not going to let the receivers win the game. Cole Beasley, he might get some more action this week with some solid practices with Whedon, but let's wait and see on that. Since all the balls are probably going to be going to Dunbar and Witten, C- for Beasley. Running back situation is way more favorable for one than the other. Joseph Randle led the charge last week. Expect the same from him from a Romo-less squad. And the Saints' bad defense, B+ for Randle. McFadden, something has to happen to Randle for him to get his shot to matter again. Randle has clearly been able to hold McFadden off, something we didn't expect. I was expecting McFadden to make his move, but he hasn't. He hasn't been able to. So everything's just on hold. C- for McFadden until Randle stumbles. Another team here that's having some mega issues. Still on the fence if Brees is going to play, but we talked about it in the beginning. They do not have an option to go 0-4. They must win this game. So for that reason, Brees is going to play. It just doesn't seem like he has the needed chemistry with his wide receivers to keep it going. So he's going to get a B. Nothing yet until he really shows that he can get that ball there. Passing or rushing, it's just kind of all over the place. When the QB tries to do too much, bad things happen. Just ask Andrew Luck. Ingram, he's still strapping up as the workhorse, with Spiller taking a nearly non-existent role here. Ingram's going to have a B on the Cowboys D, which is slightly above average, and the Saints may be playing from behind, but he can still catch balls. Cooks is the majority targets here with 18%, but there are so many pass catchers on the Saints roster. 6 pass catchers over 10% of the targets here. Second place wide receiver, Mark Ingram. That's why he gets his grade. Cooks is getting a B-, Coleman C, Colston C. It's so hard to tell who's going to get the passes, who's going to get the decent completion. Nobody on the Saints receiving core has over 200 yards in 3 games. That's a bad situation, especially if you need to start them. It's not a good time right now to start a Saints wide receiver. hopefully they can get things rolling and they can upset the Cowboys on Sunday Night Football. That's my guess. Saints win over Cowboys Sunday Night Football.
Boy, no. No.
You can't go 0-4. Drew Brees, it's just one of them long shots. I think Drew Brees is really just going to make a statement. Sunday Night Football, they have to, or they're done. No team can make the playoffs after going 0-4. It's not going to happen. So if they don't win tonight, they're done.
I think the Saints are done anyway, but that's why I'm leaving. If it's me, I'm leaving most of those guys on the bench, save for perhaps Mark Ingram. I think he's probably the only one. Oh, by the way, the New Orleans Saints just traded for a new tight end with the New England Patriots, and they snagged. I know what you're thinking. No, it's not Rob Gronkowski. No, it's not even Scott Chandler. Brian, they grabbed Michael Humanawanui.
Oh, that's exactly who I was going to guess. I knew him.
So for those of you that had Josh Hill in your top 10 tight ends preseason, you should probably go hide now. Monday night matchup is Detroit at Seattle. Matthew Stafford gets a B- for the Lions. Seattle shut down Jimmy Clausen last week completely. They gave up 21 and 26 standard scoring fantasy points to Nick Foles and Aaron Rodgers, respectively, in weeks 1 and 2. Stafford and his weapons are much closer to Foles and Rodgers than Clausen, regardless of his penchant for turning the ball over. A decent, certainly not a great, start here. Amir Abdullah gets a C. The Seahawks are very good against the run. They're ranked second in the NFL, giving up an average of about 10 fantasy points per game to the position. Games should be relatively competitive. I'm not worried about game flow here per se, but the matchup isn't the greatest. And for that reason, Joique Bell can be left firmly on your bench. I don't even know why they're trotting him out there in the first place. Receivers, Calvin Johnson gets a B. Tough matchup, but likely will be targeted heavily and should be. He's still one of the league's most elite at the position. You can't sit him unless your team is absolutely loaded. Golden Tate gets a C+. I like him slightly less than Megatron this week against a formidable opponent. Eric Ebron, a C+. Likely will have some trouble finding any open space against that sweltering Seattle defense. And on to the Seahawks offense we go with Russell Wilson. He gets a B+. Detroit has been very consistent against opposing quarterbacks this season. Consistently terrible. Wilson should have no problem putting up his usual stat line and score you probably 20 to 25 fantasy points. Marshawn Lynch is injured. It looks like this could be a game-time decision. I'm not even going to mess with it if indeed that is the case. Part of the reason, I do not own Thomas Rawls. Thomas Rawls is probably the guy that gets the lion's share of the touches if Lynch is limited or can't go. Could have a nice day against a below-average run defense on his home turf. Fred Jackson, he'll get mixed in, but I wouldn't bother. Doug Baldwin gets a B-. Not that Seattle wide receivers are big targets, but if there's one you might consider, at least as a flex play this week, it's probably Baldwin. Jimmy Graham, a B+. The squeaky wheel got the grease, just as I predicted. So I guess this week would be squeaky wheel gets the grease, part 2, electric boogaloo, right?
That's awesome.
Detroit is 28th against opposing tight ends, so I do like Jimmy Graham this week. And that is it for the matchups. Brian, we're at an hour and 6 minutes. We are giving some folks some overtime this week.
Well, you know what? It's what we do. We give back to society. We make a difference, and this is how we're doing it.
I just love the fact that it's the bye weeks, and we're well over.
Yeah, and we're over.
That's all right, though. We're on to the bargain bin segment. Go ahead. I'm sorry. You were going to say something.
I was going to say, Justin threw us a curveball, man. I mean, you can't come in with the first question from a listener and throwing some cheddar like that. Jeez, I mean, that was a debate. We could still talk about it right now.
I'm going to be debating in my head on that one for the next 48 to 72 hours. So, yeah, thank you, Justin. We appreciate it very much. I hope we're right. The bargain bin segment, Brian, we have a quarterback, a running back, and a receiver, many of whom you could probably find on your waiver wire and plug right in and play and expect some good things this week. Who's your quarterback this week in the bargain bin?
Quarterback's going to be Joe Flacco. He doesn't throw up these gaudy numbers unless he's in the Super Bowl, apparently. But Joe Flacco, Thursday night, televised game, he's got an opportunity to make himself known. He's got a pretty good knack at doing that on primetime TV. He tends to step his game up a little bit, Average Steelers defense. Steve Smith's going crazy. Forsett hopefully gets going. Hopefully they start dumping it to him and letting him make some magic happen. I think Flacco is going to be a safe start here.
I like Derek Carr for Oakland this week. 26 and 33 fantasy points in his past 2 weeks, respectively. That's standard scoring leagues. A juicy matchup at Chicago this week. Excellent weapons, good O-line, emerging Latavius Murray, who's also contributing in the passing game. I love Derek Carr this week. You knew that was going to happen, right?
Whoops.
Whoever loved David Carr? I don't think anybody. But yeah, Derek Carr is my bargain bin quarterback. On to the running back position, Brian.
I am going to go with Andre Ellington here. A lot of people dropped Ellington once he got injured as usual. Same old song and dance with him. So he's probably out there somewhere. Take a look. I think you can find him. St. Louis's D is giving up the 5th most points to running backs. I know we've had the conversation. They're going to split. They're going to do it. But if you're in that need, you need a running back because they're pretty scarce out there. I think you're going to have a decent shot here with Ellington this week.
Carlos Williams is my running back, a guy I've had my eye on since week 1. I actually grabbed in most of my leagues. Williams is the unquestionable go-to guy in the Buffalo backfield with LaShawn McCoy nursing a hamstring injury and not likely to play Sunday. Even if he does play, Williams was already outperforming McCoy before the injury. Now he gets the vast majority of the work against a below-average Giants defense that ranks 23rd against opposing running backs, giving up nearly 21 fantasy points per game to the running back position. Carlos Williams. How about your receiver?
I'm pretty excited about this one. I think it's going to go a long way. Chances are he's out there. Ted Ginn Jr., you covered him in your matchup. He's has one 20-yard plus reception in every game so far this year. And that's a good number because if you can break one tackle halfway through that 20-yarder, you might have yourself a long touchdown. Tampa Bay's defense is terrible. Ted Ginn actually quietly has 22% of the targets there in Carolina, and he's averaging 18 yards per catch.
My wide receiver, I'm very proud of this one, Brian. He is Marvin Jones, Cincinnati Bengals, who sat out all of 2014 with a recurring ankle and foot injury. How many remember his 2013? Brian, do you remember his 2013?
I remember his 2013 because the person I typically watch football with was an AJ Green owner. And he was very, very unhappy when Marvin Jones's TDs just kept going up and up and up and stole them all from AJ Green.
I think he had 4 in one game that season, but he ended up with 51 catches, 712 yards, and 10 touchdowns. 94 yards and a touchdown last week versus Baltimore. Now he gets Kansas City, who just got torched by the Packers on Monday and are currently the league's worst pass defense. Marvin Jones, yes, you're going to start AJ Green, but what about Marvin? I like Marvin.
Absolutely. I mean, especially when you start entering these bye weeks, now might be the time to grab him, especially here in 3 or 4 more weeks when the slim pickings really start hitting there in week 8 and 9. You're probably going to need to stash him away early and hold on to him. It's worth it. Touchdowns matter.
I like it, Brian. I like it a lot. That is week 4, the 515 Fantasy Football Show. We are on Facebook, 515 Fantasy Football. Also, at 515 Fantasy on Twitter. Brian, anything to add before we wrap this one up?
I'd like to thank Justin emailing us, giving us your matchup. Everybody out there in radio world, podcast world, Stitcher world, Libsyn world, send us your questions. Keep them coming. It's fun. Obviously, you can see we put a lot of thought into it. We debate it, and still, even after the segment's over, we're still yapping about it. So send us in your questions. Send us in your feedback. Take a second out of listening to the podcast. Click the rating. Give us a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 star. Leave us some honest feedback. We'll take it to heart. It's going to help us make our show better for you. We do this for you, so you have some opportunities to give feedback to make it better for you.
Enjoy your week 4. Everybody that listened to this program should have a W in their column. For Brian Eikenberry, I'm Andy Hall. Thanks for listening to the 515 Fantasy Football Show.